Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Sunken City, which is a 2004 release board game designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling. This one takes around 45 minutes to play and accommodates 2 to 4 players. Now personally I am a huge fan of Kramer and Kiesling games, and I'm going on a bit of a warpath to try all of the designs I haven't played yet. And Sunken City is certainly one of those games that have flown under the radar and pretty much faded into obscurity. I never hear anybody talk about Sunken City nowadays. And Sunken City strikes a strange balance between being a modern board game and having some more traditional vibes to it as well. So the idea of the game is that we are going to be trying to find all these different treasures, because every player is going to have their own little board like this, which shows all the different treasures that they need to find. And those treasures are going to be popping up on the communal board here. So as you can see, each player has a corner of their board each. So that's the white player, you've got the red player and the yellow player here. And as the game goes on, you're going to be building paths and erecting these buildings onto the board. And the idea is you're trying to visit those buildings with your pawn to discover treasure, because as you can see, each bit of treasure has a number on it corresponding to a building. And once you visit that building, you want to bring that treasure back to your home base to secure it safe for the end of the game. And the idea is that you want to be the first player to get all the treasures back, or at least have the most treasures before the time runs out. The way the game is going to work is that each player is going to have a hand of 6 cards, and turn by turn you're going to play one of those cards, which is going to show 3 different bits of information. So the first information is your building capacity, represented by this building here, and the paths. And that shows how many paths and buildings you can build, but you are capped at only building 1 building per turn. So this would say I can build up to 3 paths and a building. So for example, I would take a path from the stack here, or let's take 2 paths, and I could build anywhere on the board. So let's say I do this, like 1, 2, and as the third building action, I might choose to build one of these buildings. And when I build one of these buildings, they have to go on this slightly darker blue shade on the board here. The second bit of information here is basically determines how many spaces you can move per turn. So let's say I could move 3 spaces. So I go 1, 2, 3. And as soon as I touch one of the buildings of a certain number I don't have yet, I would look at my player board and I'd flip that over, the matching token over, to show that I've now found that treasure. Now that treasure is still vulnerable at the moment because it's not back at my base and safe, but it does show that I've got it in my pockets ready to be cashed in. Now the third bit of information is this Neptune logo. Now as you can see at the start of the game, the number 10 building is put right in the center of the table with Neptune stood on top of it. Now when it comes to using the Neptune action, you are going to either roll the dice according to the number of players. So let's say I rolled this one here, which would say Neptune can move 3 spaces. And then he can move from tile to tile like so. So you go 1, 2, 3, let's just say this. And whatever tile he moves off of is going to sink into the ocean. So he moved off this number 10, he moved off this tile, and he moved off this tile, meaning that those paths are no longer available. Now if you move off a building, it's going to go back to the side of the board ready to be built again by another player. But if you sink these paths, then this is going to basically act as a countdown mechanism, because as soon as this pile depletes, it's going to go into this pile, and then this pile, and then this pile, and then this pile, until the game or the end of the game is triggered. And you can use Neptune in some quite clever ways, not only to try and sink your opponents because they might have taken quite a long round trip and collected a bunch of treasures. And then as soon as he's sunk, let's say Neptune was here and he moved off here. And this player would automatically be taken back to his home base, and the building he's gone is also going to go back to the side, but any treasure he's holding is going to be flipped back face down and having to be caught again by travelling the map. But there is a bit of compensation if you are sunk by another player. You're going to take one of these Neptune tokens ready to be used in a future turn, and they are going to really boost your capacity to move around the board, because at any time on your turn, you can cash in one of these tokens and move an additional number of spaces according to how many face-down treasures you have on your board. So this is a real strong catch-up mechanism where if you keep on getting kind of ganged up on by the other players, or keep kind of starting and stopping, you are going to potentially be able to move a lot of places or a lot of spaces on the board and get back to your home base a lot quicker than the other players are. And once you play an action card, that card is going to be discarded until your whole hand of cards is going to be played through. And once you have played all those cards, you can pick them all back up into your hand, ready to be used again. The centre spot is going to be particularly valuable because if you get a bit of treasure from that spot, not only are you going to get the matching number, so in this example the 6 is going to flip over, but you're also going to flip over the number 12 tile, meaning that that's going to be worth 2 treasures, and you're going to have to at least visit the centre square once to get that number 12. So that's going to be how the game is going to play in terms of its rules. So let's talk about how I feel about Sunken City. So as you can probably tell from the explanation there, this is a pretty simple game. However, there are some quirky decisions to be made throughout the game. So first off, the management of your cards is a simple decision to be made, but one that can be quite important if you catch yourself off guard. So, for example, you need to weigh up when you can afford not to build anything and when you need a whole bunch of actions to be taken in terms of your movement. Because sometimes, you might play a bunch of cards that you needed or you wasn't using as efficiently as you could have, and then you'll leave yourself with a single card in your hand because you cannot play a card twice until you've played them all. That it just doesn't give you enough movement to get back home, and that can leave you in a very vulnerable position to be sunk by Neptune here. And additionally, I like the decision of how far am I going to push my luck here? Am I going to make lots of quick trips, maybe visit number 8 and come back, visit number 10 and then come back, or am I going to do a big round trip and just completely leave myself open to being sunk by the other players, by flipping a bunch of these over and just trying to make as few trips as possible in order to win the game and actually get the treasures back quicker than the other players. But of course, as soon as you are sunk by Neptune, all of these tokens are going to be put face down and you're going to go back to your base, which is going to put a massive speed bump in your plans. And of course, that can seem a bit take that-ish. It can seem a bit nasty. However, you are strongly compensated by these Neptune tokens, which can give you extremely powerful turns, particularly if they're compiled with these higher movement cards. Because, if I'm miles behind and I say I have 8 tiles still face down, and I combine it with this number 7 here, I'm going to get 15 movement to travel around the board, and that can be very strong. But of course, if the paths aren't there in the first place, you might not even be able to use that to your benefit. So I like how dynamic the board is. Things are always sinking. They're always, they're always being laid out. And additionally, there is some quite clever play and some clever decisions can be made in relation to Neptune. So, for example, if there's a particular building right on the other side of the board that you haven't got yet, you can use Neptune to go and sink that building and try and erect it closer to your home base so that you can get it back home and dry. And that's a quite interesting decision to make. So not only are you going to use Neptune to even sink yourself at times, or again, sink the buildings that you need, but you are, of course, trying to sink the other players as well if they have a particular good run going. So there are lots of little decisions here that do kind of add up into quite an interesting little game. Now, normally roll and move games are something that I don't really enjoy, but it does, weirdly enough, work well in Sunken City because it all goes back to that push your luck element, and the fact that you're always running away from Neptune is interesting because you might think, I am going to gamble and go to this next building and hope that he doesn't roll a high number and starts chasing me and backing me into a corner, leaving me vulnerable to be sunk again. So I like that kind of cat and mouse element to it where everyone is pulling Neptune in different directions. You're trying to move it away from yourself, but move it closer to other people. And the fact that it's not as deterministic, or it is just based on a dice roll, just keeps that interesting and keep people invested whenever that die is rolled. So I do like that quite a bit. And I also like this kind of timing mechanism where, as the rows start to be sunk, they start to go onto the next pile, and then the next pile, and the next pile. So this is almost like a tension builder, which means that, I need to get the most treasure before this final stack is placed on this 6 here. The game does take around 45 minutes to play, and for me that does feel about right. I certainly don't feel this game outstays its welcome. I will say, however, there are the odd moments of frustration, particularly towards the end of the game, as you might need a particular building and a particular piece of treasure to finish your collection. And of course the other people will know that, so they'll build that building right on the other side of the board, as far away from you as possible. And of course they're going to keep sinking the roads and keep doing things like that to try and prevent you from getting that final bit of treasure. But if you can get your head around that and understand that is part of the fun of the game, then I think it's going to be, not going to be an issue. But if you don't like that idea of kind of, going as far as you can and getting sunk and starting again and so on, then perhaps bear that in mind. It might not be for you. But turns are quick, they're quickly resolved. Just 3 simple actions you do on a turn. And it's certainly not got much scope for AP or anything like that. The replayability of Sunken City is somewhat limited. This isn't a game with lots of different modules, lots of variability. You are pretty much playing the same scenario again and again. But I think because the game is so tactical, you're always reacting to the dynamic board state, I think that's not too much of an issue because you are always engaged in trying to map out your most efficient plan, and it's not really a game where you can see several turns ahead, so you're always kept on your toes, and I think games like that do stand up to repeated plays even if the setup is identical from game to game. From a production and a design standpoint, I think the game has a certain visual appeal to it that I find quite charming. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't the most stunning game out there, but there is a real throwback vibe to it, and all the components themselves are quite durable. Particularly these big plastic buildings, these are like hollow cubes, I suppose. They do add a certain table presence to the game and do make the game come alive quite a bit. So I do like the the visual aspect and the table presence of the game, and all the components themselves are of a robust quality. They're going to stand up to repeated plays, and there's nothing here that I can really find fault with. Yes, it's all basic. Your player pieces are just these basic pawns, but I don't think that's much of an issue, and it really does go back to that initial point I made of being somewhat of a throwback and has an element of a traditional board game almost injected into this one. And surprisingly, the game does scale very well. It does actually say on the box that it works particularly well at 2 players, but I would say I personally prefer it at 3. 2 players is going to be a lot more cerebral, going to be a lot more heads ahead, as you'd probably imagine. Deliberately and directly trying to sync other players and map out your routes that way, trying to jockey for position in terms of controlling Neptune. But in a 3 or 4 player game, it's a bit more chaotic and a bit more dynamic, and I think I enjoy that a bit more, especially with a game of this weight. But no complaints whatsoever at any player counts, and you're going to get a slightly different experience depending on that player count. So overall, I'm not going to sit here and say that Sunken City is the best game ever designed, because that's certainly not the case. However, there is something about this game that just works for me. It has a real quirky vibe to it, it's very strange, and I'm always on the lookout for games that feel a bit different, have a different vibe out there, and this one certainly does fit that category. It's pretty versatile in who you can play this with. It's pretty kid-friendly. Yes, be prepared that you are potentially going to throw someone under the bus and make them lose all their hard work, but that's kind of their fault for taking a huge risk. So there are different ways you can approach this game. It's going to have some laugh-out-loud moments. The tension of being chased around the board by Neptune is fun. It has a certain charm to it in terms of its visual appeal, and it has just enough gaminess into it to keep more experienced gamers entertained. And I think that hint of Kramer and Kiesling does shine through. The almost kind of action point allowance system in terms of how many movements you take and how many buildings you take works well. The additional element that you can't play the same card again and again works well, and that push your luck aspect is where I think it really does shine through for me. I do enjoy that, and the race aspect compiled with that adds even more enjoyment. I also like the dynamic board state. Things are constantly changing, new paths are being built, ones are being teared down by Neptune, and it just adds a real fun, reactive energy to the game that I personally find a lot of fun. So, if I'm not going to say to everybody, go and pick this game up, but if you do want something a bit different, something that's family friendly, something that's accessible but still just different and a bit quirky, then I'd highly recommend checking out Sunken City. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick review. If you have, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.